maker. He's a leading figure of the British anti-war and anti-imperialist movement. Comrades, please welcome Tariq Ali.
Friends, as the 21st century grows older, what do we see? I think we are living now in an age that can be defined as the age of coercion. Whether you live in a democratic state where elections and rituals like it take place, or whether you live in other parts of the world. Effectively, the United States, the dominant power in the globe, has decided that what it wants, it will do. And in Trump, they have elected a president who doesn't wear a mask. He says these things quite openly, things which sometimes upset the liberals in the United States and his liberal opponents, because they would prefer to wear a mask to prettify the reality. He says it clearly. What we want, we're going to get. And what we are watching now, in the case of Julian Assange, Julian's lawyer announced only a few days ago that an offer was made from Trump via a congressman who said that if he gave the Russians a clean bill of health, all the charges would be dropped. So Trump knows, and the American administration knows, that this is a farce. It's something you use to get something from someone else. If you give me what I want, you can go free. The same criteria is being applied to another form of coercion. And that coercion is the trade war which the United States is conducting against China. And that also involves extradition. One of the leading people in the Chinese firm Huawei, which poses a threat to American trade interests, was picked up in Canada, locked up, and is waiting extradition to the United States, despite the fact that China, unlike Britain, is a major state in the world. It's not a stooge state, it's not a satrapy. It doesn't do the United States' bidding. They're doing this to China. And again, the message has gone out. If you make some concessions, not specified, that we need, we will release her. So the notion that this has anything to do with law is untrue. It's a lie. The reason Julian Assange, as we have stated many a time over the last few years, despite the slanderers of the mainstream media, who should be ashamed of themselves for the coverage that they have given Assange, because they will suffer themselves. And here I would say that some of those who have been the worst have been the liberal media. I have to say this, the Guardian, which used Julian Assange to publish all the material that Chelsea Manning had sent him, the New York Times, should have waged a campaign and should be waging a campaign to demand Assange's release. And these parliamentarians sitting inside the House of Commons blindly now, with the huge Tory majority, voting through whatever is put above them. I would echo what Roger has said and say to Boris Johnson, you actually have been a journalist yourself. We may not agree with what you wrote, and I never did, but you know what it is to publish a piece which annoys people, which irritates people. And are you prepared to sit silently and acquiesce in this judicial farce that is about to begin in a few hours' time? Are you going to do that? Because if you do, effectively you're opening the door to the United States being able to pick any foreign journalist from anywhere and demand his or her extradition. This is what is going to happen. So it's extremely short-sighted, this trial that is taking place. And why is the trial taking place at all? Because in this age of coercion, one of the most grotesque forms of coercion is war. Occupying countries. Organizing regime changes because you don't like the people who are in power at the moment, even though you put them there several years ago. And you wage war and you kill millions of people. And when brave journalists or brave soldiers, as Chelsea Manning then was, expose your wrongdoings, you arrest them and punish them so that this doesn't happen again. We must do our best to prevent Julian Assange being extradited. That goes without saying. But one thing they should remember, the powers that be, the concert of powers, those who rule over us, one thing they must remember, that despite the fact that they have organized and promoted this epoch of coercion to get their own way, there will always be people, regardless of what you do to Julian Assange, who will come out one day when the atrocities are no longer acceptable and expose you. And that is why, join with me, so that they can hear beyond these streets, don't extradite Assange. Come on. Once more, louder, don't extradite Assange.
And he's no introduction, he's Julian Assange's friend. Comrades, please welcome Yanis Varoufakis.
Leaking powers, guilty secrets is not a phrase, it is a sentence. And no one is facing a longer sentence than Julian Assange for doing that precisely. Now, Julian has gained the right to quote from another prisoner, from another time, from another enemy of empire, Mahatma Gandhi. Julian, like Gandhi, could say, you can chain me, you can torture me, you can destroy my body, but you can't imprison my mind. Well, Julian, you have won the right to say this, but we don't have the right to agree with him. We have a duty. We have a duty to stop them from destroying Julian's body. We have a duty not to let them continue his torture. Comrades, first they came for Julian. Next, they will come for our comrades, our friends, our neighbors. Immediately after that, they will come for the good people of The Guardian and of the BBC. They will go after anyone who dares challenge the right of power of the oligarchy without frontiers to commit crimes against humanity in our name without our knowledge. Do you remember some months ago, Mike Pompeo, let me remind you who that gentleman is. He was Trump's first choice for CIA director and currently the Secretary of State. He described WikiLeaks as a non-governmental, hostile intelligence service. You know what? He's right. This is exactly what WikiLeaks is. But also, it is exactly what any self-regarding newspaper, television station, radio station should be. A non-governmental intelligence service on behalf of citizens that are looking critically at their government. Dan Ellsberg, that wonderful whistleblower, one of my greatest heroes, and Noam Chomsky, another hero of ours. They warned the journalists who are failing so spectacularly to defend Julian today. They warned them, you are next. You are on a hit list with a ranking order, the hit list of President Trump, who considers all of the press to be the enemy of the people. When you turned a blind eye to Julian's torture, you are consenting to your own emasculation. That is our message to the BBC. That is our message to The Guardian. Of course, you do not need me to lecture you, because by being here, you have proven that you know all that. But you've also acquired a duty, we all have, to let into the secret those who are not here today. Because, you know, Julian's worst enemy, freedom's worst enemy, are not evil people in smoke-filled rooms plotting against good people. No. Julian's worst enemy, freedom's worst enemy, is apathy. It is fatigue. It is good people, too tired, too exhausted, too disheartened, working 0-hour contracts, whatever, to be able to expend the energy that you and I have the privilege of expending today. It is banality. It is people who are neither good nor bad working in these offices in Whitehall. No, they're not evil. They're just banal. Too banal to care. We have to make them care. On a slightly personal note, I got to know Julian Assange when he took an interest in me, because some years ago, some of you may have heard about this, I blew the whistle on the European finance ministers' cabal who were plotting behind closed doors, turning against the interests of their people, not just the Greek people, but the German people, the French people, everyone, behind closed doors. On the 10th of March, in a few days' time, one of the projects that Julian and I started is going to see the light of day. Watch out for EuroLeaks. Soon after we met, together with Brian Eno, who hates being in this very small clique, but it's not a small clique, because as Brian knows, what we started with Julian Assange in February 2016 in Berlin, the Democracy in Europe movement, now has tens of thousands of members everywhere. As we speak, a similar demonstration is taking place in Athens with our members of parliament representing the movement that Julian Assange helped to put together. Tomorrow, I'm going to be in Belmarsh, visiting together with John Shipton, Julian's magnificent father, Julian. I will go in there with trepidation and a sense of guilt, because I'm going to walk in there, but I'm also going to walk out of there. And I'm going to relay to him your spirit, the spirit of everyone from every European country and beyond. Because you may be out of the EU, but you are firmly embedded in Europe's progressive movement. Friends, comrades, as my friend and Julian's friend, Philip Adams from Australia, said recently, we are not going to let them turn Julian into a latter-day man in the iron mask or a man forgotten in an iron cell. So stiffen your upper lip. We are in the business of allowing unalloyed, unarmed truth to have the final word. Because we are in the business of creating the circumstances so that Julian's sentence will end neither with a bang nor with a whimper, but with a magnificent full stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Yanis. Our next speaker is widely regarded as one of UK's finest hip-hop artists. He's a fearless political activist, and that sets him apart from all his contemporaries. He's a patron of the Stop the War Coalition and the voice of the Palestinians. Comrades, please welcome LowKey.
Thank you very much. Just to start off with, can we please give a massive round of applause to John Shipton and the family of Julian Assange. Please give a massive, massive round of applause. We want to salute you. We want to salute you. And we are in awe of your courage and your strength in the face of what is unprecedented state manipulation and psychological warfare. I'd like to start by reading a small excerpt from a poem by Mahmoud Darwish, The Music of Human Flesh. Oh, you with bloodshot eyes and bloody hands, night is short-lived. The detention room lasts not forever, nor yet the links of chains. As was said earlier, they may try to take Julian Assange's life, but they will not take his soul. If I can speak as an Iraqi, watching the footage in 2010 of the collateral murder video, what we saw for the first time was a truth that we knew. The United States military were killing civilians, even if they were employees of Reuters news agency and they were journalists. They were being mowed down in the streets. We knew it to be true. In the Falklands War of 1982, there were 2 photojournalists that were sent by Margaret Thatcher. No television broadcasts were allowed. There was an orthodoxy that is clung to by those in the military establishment, that the reason for the horrific and traumatic to the US military establishment defeat in Vietnam was the access that journalists had to be able to put those pictures out to the public and the people here in the metropoles to rise up and protest against what their governments were doing. How can we forget it was the Vietnam Solidarity Campaign that mobilized over 100,000 people to the streets of this country to stop Harold Wilson sending the British Army to join the United States in the Vietnam War. The orthodoxy that has been clung to is that the media establishment must be mouthpieces for the Ministry of Defense. They must uncritically reproduce verbatim the press releases they are given by the Ministry of Defense. How many journalists among us are guilty of that crime to journalism, merely reproducing the words of the powerful? We know that the sales of newspapers are going this way. How are newspapers making their money? Through advertisements on the internet. Julian Assange and WikiLeaks were responsible for millions of files becoming public property. How many oil adverts were put on the pages of The Guardian on the back of Julian Assange's stories and works for WikiLeaks? How much money did these same newspapers that are hanging him out to dry, that are clamoring for his execution, how much money have they got from major oil companies to advertise them for them on their pages? We look at Sajid Javid and his responsibility, and we know that one of the criteria in which the British government are permitted to block an extradition is if the penalty that a person may face would be the death penalty. Now, Sajid Javid has received £31,000 from the American Enterprise Institute, neocon, right-wing institute. Jonah Goldberg, who is a fellow there, said the words clearly. WikiLeaks is easily among the most significant and well-publicized breaches of American national security since the Rosenbergs gave the Soviets the bomb. So again, I ask, why hasn't Assange been garroted in his hotel room? It's a serious question. Do you know what they did to the Rosenbergs? They killed them. They killed them. This is what we are fighting for. We are fighting for the life of Julian Assange. If he is left to the devices of the US establishment, we do not know what will happen to him. Hillary Clinton said, why can't we just treat them like terrorists? Mitch McConnell of the AEI said also that Assange was a high-tech terrorist. Do you know what in the war of terror, the terrorist as a loose category and definition has been? It has been a state of exception whereby habeas corpus has meant nothing, whereby the Magna Carta has been thrown out of the window and may have been turned into a paper plane for Tony Blair to play with George Bush. It means nothing to those that are in prison now. 70 to 80% of the people in prison for terrorist charges in this country are in jail for non-violent offences. We're talking about literature. We're talking about pieces of work. That's what they're saying about Julian Assange, that his rights should be taken away, that he should occupy a space of rightlessness. Were it not for the WikiLeaks work, we would not know the true face of our establishment. And one last word, and this word is to Alan Duncan, who saw fit to refer to Julian Assange as a miserable little worm. Let me tell you something. Julian Assange has more courage, has more strength of spirit, has more independence, has more brilliance in his little finger than Alan Duncan has in his entire career. Thank you very much.